All right, everyone. It's been funny watching Netanyahu, especially. Like, he has some sort of stick up his ass about the Polish, I think. And I'm not exactly sure why, but he released a statement the other day. He was talking about, like, the Holocaust. And he says, well, there were some Polish people that cooperated in that. And so, things and stuff, I guess. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah, there were certain Germans as well that cooperated with the partisans and with the resistance there, both before and during the Allied invasions into, France and so forth. Does that mean that you exonerate all Germans by default? Like I guess his thing is like Poland owes him or the nation of Israel something. And I'm thinking to myself, why would they do that? The majority of the Polish didn't want to be part of the German experiment, so to speak, nor did they want to be Soviets. They got screwed twice. It was a difficult half a century for poor Poland. They still have a chunk of their land missing held by the Russians, but we won't even get into that territorial dispute, because who gives a fuck? Very interesting. It's very interesting how Netanyahu can try to tie in the handful of people who did indeed support the Nazis to a reason why they should feel collectively shameful when the majority of people resisted that. That'd be like saying, well, there were American Nazis, like back in the late 30s and stuff, they had rallies, sometimes of tens of thousands of people in support of Germany. Now, this is largely before the invasion of Poland, but it did exist. There were movements associated with that. By and large, though, most Americans, especially early on, were like ambivalent. They didn't support Hitler. They certainly didn't support Stalin. I think you probably would have had more support for the communist movement among certain far-left segments of American society. Does that mean that Americans should feel bad? There are people that think that, actually, which is really very funny. Oh, you're of kind of German heritage, but you're American. It's like, well, no, the United States fought against Germany, not with it. I think some people don't understand that part of history. I think some of them think that there were a lot of Americans that, put on swastikas and went over to goose step over for Adolf. It never happened. But here's the idea of collective guilt is crazy anyway. Collective shame for past events. It's like the people alive today. Let's say that Poland gave Israel money. Like, okay, well, here's, reparations or whatever. Most of the money would be coming from people who didn't participate in those events anyway. Even if you construe it as Poland collectively being responsible as a political entity, those individuals that you're taking stuff from, you're taking money from the little people. You're not taking money from some vacuous sort of separate externalized government. The government's money all came from the people anyway. You're just robbing them. It's basically a shakedown. We've seen this before. We've seen Netanyahu use this as a political issue. He tries to do this to appeal to Israeli nationalism in order to win political points. Now, he's embattled by scandal right now. Like, isn't he literally part of a criminal investigation at this point? And I know his wife, didn't she misuse funds, supposedly? So what's happened, ultimately, is that he's seeking to he's getting the Israeli people to look at other stuff. That's why he's done this perpetually every few years. He talks about how Iran is going to develop nukes. He does this as a distraction because he doesn't want people to focus on the price of goods in Israel or his regime's own problems and scandals. Instead, he wants to focus people on other stuff so he can keep getting reelected, because he can come out and say, well, we've got this problem, and I'm the only one that can solve it. Iran wants to destroy us. I'm the only one who's strong enough to prevent that from happening. Vote for Netanyahu. And so he's trying to get people to focus on this non-existent, I guess, Polish Nazi boogeyman or something like that. And it's just really, really funny. And the funny thing is, people are retweeting with regards to the wall. They're like, oh, haha, yeah, I strongly support the Trump's border wall. We've got a wall. It works really great. And I'm thinking to myself, this would be a better political message if Netanyahu were a more sane individual. Like with friends like Netanyahu, Trump almost doesn't need enemies when you really think about it. It's like, yeah, in the wall construction Israel, fine, that's great. But the thing is, like, Netanyahu actually is sort of like seemingly xenophobic. Like, Trump's not. Trump doesn't really give a fuck. He just wants to defend the border. Netanyahu turns it into a perpetual... He's more like the liberals here with the identity politics. Oh, Polish Nazis from back in the 30s and 40s and shit. Okay. A very small number of people. You probably would have found more support for Stalin, but probably some of these people fled to Stalin thinking that he'd save them from the evil Nazis, which was never going to happen. It's like, and then probably some people flocked to the western side. And like, oh, thank goodness you're here. Those commies, they were getting a little bit rowdy over there on the other side of the border, started talking about our vodka being bad and stuff. No, Poland is not responsible for the Holocaust in any meaningful way. You'd say maybe a nation an auxiliary state like Austria might have some of the blame, I suppose. But it's like nobody alive there pretty much was alive back then. Fucking, are you going to ramble about it forever as a justification for your own political scandals? That's what Netanyahu has devolved into over time. He brings up one of persecution in the 40s, Hitler and stuff. He'll bring that up. Or he'll bring up Iran and nukes, or Bashar al-Assad now, I suppose, airstrikes or whatever. Or rise of anti-Semitism in Europe. And he tries to focus people on those things so that they won't focus on his wife's economic foibles with taxpayer money, I guess, or his inefficiency, again, the price of goods, the high tax state of Israel. He doesn't want them to focus on that, because if they did, they wouldn't re-elect him. His party would stop existing pretty much, and he'd end up with one of the other pro-war political parties probably taking over. It's not that it would accomplish anything, but I just thought that was interesting. Netanyahu is a weird person. Like, one minute he says something, he's like the broken clock sort of individual. He says something that makes sense, but then he says all this off-the-rails stuff, and it, totally cheapens everything that he could say. It would actually be helpful and actually be true. Very weird character indeed. That's about all. Peace out.